Welcome back everyone to the second segment of your chapter 9 lecture. Here in this lecture we are going to learn a theoretical model of group development. So we are going to see the different stages attached to a group development and the model which is called the punctuated equilibrium model. So let's see it. First of all, there are a few stages which applies to developing a group. Now, this model is actually summarized is called punctuated equilibrium model or PEM in short. However, this applies to a temporary groups. I'll talk about this when I conclude the model descriptions. Let's just see the stages first. So as you can see in this picture here, there are phase 1 and phase 2, and we have outlined the x-axis by time. That means the time that it takes to develop the group, and on the y-axis it has performance with low and high continuum. Now what happens is when the group first setting their group direction is part of the phase 1, then the phase 1 also take place as like a inertia. So these lines, the lines that you're seeing here, these lines are actually called inertia. So then this period is called the transitions, and after that transitions, the changes, the actual activity, the force that take place, and with that force, with that transition, the group reaches to its deadline, which is the completion stress, which is here. So first of all, the group start with their meeting, they are identifying the activities, what they have to do, which is part of the phase 1, and as soon as they do so, they reach to the inertia stage, which is we call kind of a transition phase. After they completing or go through the transition phase, they reach they steps into the phase 2. In phase 2, they start actually working, they speed up their activity, and they go to the end, which is the completions. So this is like, as I mentioned earlier about the temporary group, that means they have some task deadline. So that means that is why we have attached this x-axis, which is time, and A and B were referring to 2 points of time. So A is the starting point of time and B is the deadline or the closer point. And performance, as you can see at the beginning, of course they are meeting for the first time, they don't know the objectives, they don't know the team group roles, they are who is going to be supervise them, those things. So their performance is low. But at this point, up to this transition point chart, which before the inertia, their performance seems to be lacking, or at least zero, no performance. However, after this transition, after they pass their inertia stage, when they reach to phase 2, it starts to jump up, and at the end the performance starts to increase. So as you can see, half of the time, if you divide the whole period by 2, half of the time they actually spend to go through this transition phase. They actually spend to understanding the group objective, the task objectives, the aims and goals, getting to know each other within the group members, so that they can actually develop their objectives, develop their activities, planning to achieve their objectives by the deadline. So that is why the whole applications are applicable to the temporary groups when they have some definite deadline. Now let's look at these stages in few more details, to understand how those stages are actually working. So first of all, when they meet for the first time, their general purpose and direction is established, their framework of behavior pattern and assumptions through which the group will approach, these are all established. So this first meeting is actually objective statement. So here they set their targets, their objectives, they get to know what to do, why they are here, why they are actually this group. So that is why this first meeting is important in terms of group development model. And once they get to know everything, their direction is solidified, it's unlikely that they will move back to the first meeting, because they now know, they now clear, the group members are now clear about what they have to do. And here the period it starts, we call is the inertia. So here it's just like, the group members, they don't work, they become locked up into fixed course of actions, because after that, okay, this is my objectives, I have to achieve this, these are the steps I have to take. So you just think by yourself, the group members think by themselves what or how or from where they will be starting. So they think about different challenges, maybe like if they want to achieve a target, what are the challenges they might face. So these are the inertia, which is still part of the phase one. So as I have mentioned earlier, almost half of the time within the deadline, they spend on thinking and finding out the challenges, the ways they can solve those challenges. So it's not actually wasted, but it's actually important that they don't cross that limit, because if you have a deadline to complete, if you spend two-thirds of your overall time duration is about thinking, you don't work, then of course at the end of the day you may not achieve your deadline. So therefore, by automatically the group spend almost half of their deadline of the whole time duration by thinking and finding out the uh, courses of actions. Then once their discoveries or thinking is done, they actually transition to the phase two, so which is the ultimately they starts working. For example, the members spend an hour on their project or 6 months. So there is no specific timeline here, because for each activity, each time you will be assigned with some specific jobs, their deadlines will be different. So some case you may have deadline for 6 weeks, some case you may have deadline for 6 days. So that's how it works. Then after the midpoint, the phase two and the completion, these 2 points, they start working like a alarm clock, like it's a telling you, wake up, you have to start your work because the deadline is knocking at your door. So this transition ends phase one, and as I've said, the phase one is finished here within these transitions, and then you start working from here and finish your deadline. So therefore, you just revise your activities, because now you actually have what? Let's say your overall duration for completing a task was 4 weeks. You have spent 2 weeks up to here. Now you actually have 2 weeks only left to do your objective achievement. So therefore you just revise your direction in the phase two, so that you can achieve your objectives and within the timeline. So that's how these transitions within the group and stages they actually perform. So all you have to understand is definitely which is the phase one and phase two. In phase one, which actually eats up half of your time, where you meet for the first time, you set your directions, you get to know what should be done, then you of course leave it, you just locked up by thinking and making assumptions, thinking about challenges, which is actually the part of the inertia. And then once you've gone through these stages, you move to the phase two, where you reset your directions, because you only now have half of the time left. Then you start actually performing to achieve your objectives. So that's how this PEM model works. So as I've said earlier, that when you've reached to the completion stage, you just complete your activity, you final push to achieve your task. So that's how this PM model ends in the last stage, where your last meeting happens and you just finish it. So that's how this model ends with this completion stage. Now in summary, as I've mentioned earlier, there are some points that you should be noted before applying this model. So this model actually characterizes group as exhibiting long period of inertia. So there are inertia, as you have seen, that almost half of the time is spent on this transition inertia space. So there will be brief revolutionary changes triggered primarily by the members' awareness of time and deadlines. So that is what I have said in within the group development model, that half of your time you spend on thinking, finding out the challenges and how to resolve those challenges. So those are the inertia and transition is paid, and the rest of the time you spend on time and deadlines. However, this is not the only model the group is tested by for. However, it is a dominant theory. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if you remember, this model doesn't apply to all groups, but is suited to finite quality of temporary tasks. So because there is a time deadline attached to this model. If there is no time deadline, it's a infinite group, which is very rare, although, but when there is no timeline, no deadline, then this model doesn't work because you have an infinite period of time to complete your task. So here, when you are applying this model, we have to make sure that first, whether we have a timeline or not. If there is no timeline, then of course this model is not going to be applicable. So that is the thing that you have to remember when we apply this model in some situations and contexts. So please go through this model again. You may also seek your textbook in terms of finding the stages in more detailed descriptions, but do know their applications very well. Next, we will see about the comparison between group decision making and individual decision making. Thank you.